Hi everyone, it's Lisa from My Dreaming Soap. Welcome to my channel and thanks for dropping by. It's just a quick video today because it's really madly busy here, but I wanted to get something up for you to watch. Now I thought today, as I'm doing a reasonably straightforward soap, that we'd spend a little bit of time thinking in more detail about how we extrude soap dough and some of the things that we're looking for to make sure it always works successfully. So the first thing for me, whether you've made your own soap dough or you've bought it in, is how you store it. And can you see here that I've got mine really tightly wrapped? I vacuum seal all of my soap dough. Now you don't need to go to that extent, but you do need to make sure that it is kept properly wrapped and away from any air. Remember, when your soaps are exposed to air, they cure and harden, and you don't want that to happen with soap dough. The second thing is to get it ready to extrude properly, i.e. condition it before you use it. And this generally just means moulding it around in your hands, rolling it around on a table, that sort of thing. And what you're looking for is to get a nice, solid, consistent piece of soap dough. Squish it in your fingers and stuff like that. If you can feel lumps and bumps, it's not going to extrude nicely. Have a look at the amount of soap dough in your hands and how it's rolled. Is it all joined together in one solid blob, or has it got cracks and things in? Again, things like that will stop it extruding nicely. So make sure you've conditioned it nicely before you pop it in your extruder gun. And when you actually start extruding, be careful with the extruding. You know, the more care you take at this point will give you a better shape in your soap. So as you first start to turn your extruder handle, you'll typically find that the soap dough curls around the extruder. Try and make sure that you bend that as straight as possible. And once you've got it going straight, it will typically tend to stay straight. Now quite often in my videos, as you can see here, you'll actually see my extruder right at the top of the screen with the extruded dough sort of wiggling its way down the screen. I do this because I find it easier to actually lay my extruder over the edge of my work surface so I can keep it flat on the surface and not wiggle it and wang it around in the air. I then wind the extruder out and just let a straight line of soap dough come out. If you're extruding a fairly basic shape, maybe something that's just a circular tube or a heart or something, then that's not so vitally important. However, the more complicated your shapes get, the more important it is to extrude them straight. You're going to have them straight for putting them in your soap anyway. And therefore, what happens if you extrude them and let them curl as they extrude, each time you then bend them to straighten them up, they then cause cracks and weaknesses in your embeds. So therefore, get them extruding straight. That first little bit, get that bit coming out straight, and then get the rest of it as straight as possible, and you'll have much better quality extrusions. So we've talked about texture, and it shouldn't be lumpy or bumpy or cracked or anything. But what about how firm should it be? You do actually want your soap dough to be really quite firm. Certainly if you roll it in your hands and it's sticking to your hands, all that's going to happen is that's going to stick to your extruder gun and then stick to the surface, and you're not going to have good extrusions. Can you see how clean mine is here as I'm rolling it around? It's not leaving any tacky mess on the surface at all. And as I said, it should be pretty firm. If you could basically just push that soap dough through a disc without having to use the windy handle, it's likely to be too soft. Now, you might think soft is good. It's not really. The firmer your soap dough is, the more compact it is, and it will make a better extrusion. Also, if your soap dough is very soft, it's likely to come out of the extruder disc quite soft, and therefore it kind of just sometimes have a look at your extrusions and they're not nice and solid. They can be a little bit bitty and a little bit weak. So you really want to have a good firm piece of soap dough. And then what should we do with our extrusions once we've extruded them? It depends on what your purpose for them is. So Typically, you'll be doing one of two things. You'll either be using these as embeds throughout your soap, or maybe you'll be using them as embeds on top of your soap. Let's deal with the first one first. So if you're putting them as embeds throughout your soap, in this case, you could, in theory, extrude them, chop them to the appropriate size and put them in your soap straight away. It's fine, it works, they adhere very well. I guess the only slight problem with doing that is they can be a bit difficult to control. And what can even happen is if you've put a fairly new floppy extrusion into a soap and then you pour more soap around it, it's likely to actually bend that extruded bit of dough. Which, again, if you're just putting stuff in randomly, I don't know, maybe like stars in a sky or something, it's probably fine. But if you want something in a precise location, so let's say, for example, you're putting an eye into a head or something, you really don't want that to be halfway down whatever it is chin to you, through the middle of the loaf or something. So letting your extrusion set up a little bit is a good idea. Now, I would recommend no more really than a few hours or up to possibly a day to let them set up. Any more than that, I would be covering them up and sealing them again, even with some cling wrap or something. Why do we need to do that? Remember, air makes our soap cure, and we don't really want these extrusions to cure too much. Ideally, you want them as similar to your fresh soap as possible. Because if you've got a very cured embed and then fresh soap, they're at two different stages of their cure. And as the soap continues to cure, you can find that they shrink in different rates. Now, why that can be a further problem is as you then use the soap, or maybe your customers use your soap as if you sell it, you can find that as the soap bars get thinner, these embeds will then just pop out of the soap. Okay, so try and keep them nice and moist so they stick in well. If you're going to leave them and not use them for more than a day maximum, get them wrapped up and protected. What about if we're using extrusions to produce embeds on the top of our bar? Now, typically when we're doing that, like for example in my Winter Woolies soap where I wanted to put some mittens on the top of my soap, you're going to take your extruded strips of soap dough and chop them up into little pieces to make those great little embeds. Now in this case, you probably want your embed to be reasonably firm. If it's too soft, it's just going to squash and distort the shape. So here I would advise, if you have time, to let them sit out for a day, and that will then give you a nice consistency so you don't squash the embed as you cut it and distort its shape. Another thing you can do that really helps if your soap dough is a little bit softer and you haven't had time to let it set up well, or if you've got a spiky embed, like here I've got some stars, is to cut them on something soft. Here I've just rolled up a piece of tissue paper so that shields the star from pressing against the chopping board, and it gets me a nice pointy star shape. And then back to our soap today. Last thing I'll just talk about before we get on with this soap is which extruder should you buy? Now, this extruder that I've got is my personal favourite. It's the Fimo Professional Extruder, and I'm going to put a link to the one that I've got, which obviously will be a UK link, but hopefully you can find them in other places, but at least you'll know which extruder it is. As far as I'm concerned, this is the best extruder that I've found. The quality is excellent, it works beautifully, and it takes 23mm discs. So these are bigger than discs that you find in a lot of the other extruders. Why is that important? The bigger the disc, the better designs that you can get. If you've got a very tiny disc, it really limits the designs that you can produce. And if, for example, if you went into my shop, you would see that I do discs for all different types of extruders, but the smaller discs always have fewer designs than the ones available in the larger discs. So if you're looking for an extruder, one of these bigger ones is better from the availability of what you can do with them and just the quality of the extruder itself. Another very popular extruder is a Makins extruder. And also you can get a lot of extruders on Amazon, and they're very similar to the Makins extruder. All of these ones take 18mm discs. I must admit I'm not a fan of these. They work okay, but as far as I'm concerned, the quality is nowhere near as good as the Fimo extruder. They're just a little bit more flimsy. They don't screw together so nicely, and they're smaller, so what you can do with them is limited. But as I said, you can pick them up pretty cheaply on Amazon and in all sorts of places. One other thing I'm going to mention is an adapter that you can buy. So if you have a smaller extruder, one that takes the smaller 18mm discs, you can get an adapter, and it's called a Walnut Hollow extruder adapter or extruder extender. It's something like that. Now it's specifically made for the Walnut Hollow extruder, which is basically very similar to the Makins ones. It's one of those small 18mm extruders, but it does fit lots and lots of the extruders. So generally, if you've got one of the small ones, this one would probably fit. And what it does is it's like an extra cap that goes on the end of your extruder, and it makes the end of it, the bit that you extrude from, it makes it bigger, so you can use bigger discs, and therefore that opens up more designs for you. So if you've got one of these smaller extruders, maybe consider getting one of these adapters. A word of warning, if you do have one of these extruder extenders, the Walnut Hollow one, I don't know of any other makes out there. The instructions for that do say that you would need 23mm discs. This is incorrect. If you put a 23mm disc inside that adapter, they will fall straight out. Okay, you actually need 24mm discs to go in those. Okay, so you can't just go and buy 23mm discs. I sell all the discs for all the adapters and the extruders in my shop if you did need to get any. And of course, I'll leave a link to that in the description below. Okay, let's give your eardrums a bit of a rest from me yakking on about extruders and soap doughs, and let's make the rest of our soap. As I said, it's a fairly simple design, so I'm just going to start off mixing up my first layer, which is going to be all the snowy areas around the rabbits. So I've just got my oils and my lye, and I'm just going to mix them together and bring them to emulsion as normal. The fragrance I'm using today is Winter Wonderland from Nurture Soap. I did get this from the USA, which is not something that I typically do. I try to buy here in the UK, but I was placing an order, and this was a fragrance that was advised by my good friend Whitney from Cheeky Goat Soapery, and I must admit it is absolutely spectacular. I love it. We're doing snow, so I bet you're not surprised that we're adding in some titanium dioxide. My batter is actually pretty white actually, so I could probably get away without it, but I did want to make sure it was a nice snowy white in this scene. I always pre-disperse my titanium dioxide before I use it, and again I've got a video explaining exactly how I do that, and I always use oil soluble titanium dioxide. Actually, mine can dissolve in both. The reason I use the oil one is because it then stops you having to put more water in your soap. I like to do a good water discount. It stops things like soda ash, glycerin rivers and all that sort of thing. So I don't want to be adding in any extra water if I don't have to. So oil soluble is always the one for me. I'm going to bring this batter to a reasonably decent trace. I want it sort of like almost getting onto a medium trace. I still want it nice and pourable though. And then I'll just add in my fragrance oil and we'll just start pouring it into the mould. So, on to another purchase for me from Nurture Soap. Now, I'm not sponsored by Nurture Soap or anything. I just, initially I was drawn to these moulds. They looked like a great shape and I needed some more moulds. I was running out of moulds and not being able to make enough soap. So again, these were advised by good old Whitney from Cheeky Goat Soap. And it was these that, because I was placing an order for them, I then ended up getting some fragrance oils as well. So we can do a little bit of a review of this mould while we're here as well. So as you can see, I've just literally poured in that first layer. It's pretty fluid, that's fine. I'm just going to leave it to set up for a while. This fragrance oil does move a little bit, so therefore it shouldn't be too long having to wait for it to set up. But I wouldn't say it accelerates. It doesn't make your batter go uncontrollably thick or anything. It's got quite a nice paste to it. So once I'm happy that it's firm enough to support my first embed, I'm just going to grab my two first little bunnies. Aren't they cute? There they are. And then we'll pop those into the soap. Now, you've seen me do embeds and that sort of thing a lot of times before, and I've been going on and bending your ear for quite a while now. So I'm going to set the rest of this to music to give you a little bit of a break from me going on, and I'll just drop some notes and things on the screen if there's anything that needs explaining as I'm going through.
There's some stains on your photo, little cracks on your rusty frame, stuck in the mud, but it's okay. I don't have the pieces of you buried in the flashbacks. All these wicked
And then here we are the next day, and I thought I would unmould this on the screen. So as you can see with this mould, the sides come off the mould nicely, so you can easily get your silicone liner out. And this silicone liner is really quite stiff, which I think initially some people might go, I don't really like it, but I do really like it, because the way that I tend to unmould from silicone anyway is I never try and peel the silicone liner off. I always put my soap upside down and then press on the top, well, the bottom of the silicone liner, and that allows the soap, as long as it's ready, to drop out of the mould. Now, I did find this a little trickier than perhaps necessary, and I think that's because I didn't clean right inside, you know, the bit between the soap and the top of the mould. I could have cleaned that off a little bit better, so I had a few bits and pieces catching. I have used this mould a number of times since this video, and the soap just pops out really beautifully. I do really like it. So then I always just go over the edges with a vegetable peeler. That just saves when you're beveling your edges, having to do each of those individual short sides. So doing it now saves you a little bit of time. And then in with my soap cutter. Now I've used this quite a bit. I do like it. One thing I have found is that it does seem to cause more drag marks than I've had from my other single soap cutter. Now I know I haven't changed my recipe or anything, so I think it can only be to do with the wires that are used in this. So I am actually, well, I have since this video actually changed out the wires that came with this, and I've put on some 18 gauge guitar wires on it to improve the cut and stop the drag lines. And here are our final soaps. I do really like them. I like my little bunny rabbits. I'm really pleased with how they've come out. My tree's gone a little bit wonky, but we're going to pretend it's a windswept wintry tree. And here's some pictures of the final soap. This soap will be available in the shop update that's happening at 6 PM UK time on the 1st of January. So that's the day that I'm uploading this video. I hope you enjoyed this video and you like the soap. If you have, it would be great if you gave me a thumbs up. If you'd like to see what I'm making in the future, why not subscribe to my channel? If you've got any questions or comments, then please leave them in the comments section below. Thanks for watching everyone. Happy soaping!